How did a former bodybuilder and Hollywood action hero from Austria manage to reshape the destiny of California, a state whose economy alone rivals the world's largest nations? California is a powerhouse with a GDP of $3.6 trillion and would rank as the world's fifth largest economy. So the question lingers, did Arnold Schwarzenegger's tenure as governor leave California in a better or worse position?
Stick around.
If you've lived under a rock for the last 40 years and don't know who Arnie is, he was born in Austria in 1947. With a passion for bodybuilding from a young age, he began weight training as a teenager. He moved to the United States in 1968 and quickly rose to fame in the bodybuilding world, winning the Mr. Olympia title 7 times. In the 1970s, Schwarzenegger transitioned to acting and eventually became a Hollywood superstar when he shot to stardom as The Terminator. He became one of the most bankable and highest paid actors in the world throughout the 1980s and 1990s. However, in 2003, Schwarzenegger made a surprising move into politics in what was the third act of his life.
We're police officers, not politicians.
He successfully ran for governor of California as a Republican candidate in a special recall election, defeating the incumbent governor, Gray Davis. Now, where things get more intriguing is that at the time, Schwarzenegger was married to Maria Shriver, a member of the illustrious Kennedy dynasty and niece to former Democratic President John F. Kennedy. This tie made his allegiance to the Republican Party all the more unexpected and raised plenty of eyebrows. Once he took office in the government buildings of California's capital, Sacramento, he set up a smoking tent amidst the political hustle and bustle, enjoying his cigars whilst wheeling and dealing with state's lawmakers. It was a bold move and unconventional approach to the political game. He appointed Susan Kennedy, a Democrat and not a member of the Kennedy family, to become his chief of staff.
I am tired of the same old faces.
This decision sent shockwaves through the political landscape. In a time where political polarization was the norm, Schwarzenegger's choice signaled a deep commitment to bipartisan cooperation. It's a move rarely seen before and rarely seen since. When he took office, California was facing significant budget deficits. To tackle the issue, he pursued a combination of spending cuts and revenue-raising measures. He aimed to make the state's finances more sustainable in the long term and advocated for budget reforms and sought to address the state's pension system. However, his fiscal policies were not without controversy, as budget cuts to areas like education and healthcare faced opposition. Schwarzenegger's approach was seen by some as a pragmatic response to the state's fiscal crisis, whilst others criticised the impact on cuts to essential services. Fiscal policy in California has always been a complex and contentious issue, and Schwarzenegger's tenure as governor was no exception. He faced trouble with Proposition 13, which was passed by voters in 1978 and caps how much property taxes can go up by. It gives homeowners stability, but also makes it hard for local governments to make money, so therefore they rely on state support. People will remember how hard he worked to keep the state's budget stable and how ready he was to work with people from different parties to get things done. But relying on temporary tax measures and making controversial budget cuts left some unresolved financial problems for his successors to deal with. This just shows how hard it is to run an economy as big as California's, and his legacy is a mixture of accomplishments and ongoing problems in the state's fiscal policy landscape.
Don't give up your day job.
Schwarzenegger also wanted to improve California's schools. He tried to give schools more money, which was a good idea, and with this money, schools could get better and class sizes could be made smaller. But because he didn't have enough money, he had to cut the plan, and what happened was the opposite of what he intended to do. However, during his time in office, one program that stood out was the After School Education and Safety Program, ASES. The goal of the ASES program was to give students a safe and productive place to be after the normal school day was over. It was made to give Californian kids a wide range of educational and enrichment tasks to keep them learning and growing outside of school hours. Both Republicans and Democrats backed the program because of how Schwarzenegger garnered support. He won over the Democrats by telling them about the benefits for working parents, and won over Republicans by showing how it would save money in the long run. Schwarzenegger tried to help, but his policies were not always good, and in the long run, cutting the budget and putting too much emphasis on test scores made things worse. So even though he meant well, it wasn't a good thing for education in California as a whole, and especially for those who needed it the most. He was also a strong supporter of environmental measures when he was governor. I guess he couldn't just help but save the world again. Schwarzenegger was a driving force behind the Global Warming Solutions Act, AB 32, which he signed into law in 2006. This landmark legislation set a clear objective of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in California to levels equivalent to those in 1990 by the year 2020. Some parts of Canada, Australia, the EU, the UK, as well as US states like New York, Washington, Oregon, and Hawaii have all put into place climate policies and carbon reduction goals similar to those in AB 32. Schwarzenegger also worked hard to support the growth of clean energy sources, especially solar power, most likely because it's so warm and sunny in California. During his time in office, the number of solar setups in homes and businesses in California grew exponentially, making California a national leader in solar. All of this showed that Arnie was quite possibly a little bit ahead of the curve when it came to climate issues. Schwarzenegger also put infrastructure development at the top of his list of priorities to meet the state's growing needs. He worked on projects to improve roads, bridges, and public transportation systems, which are all important for keeping California's aging infrastructure in good shape and reducing traffic congestion, which is a big problem in the state's cities. So let's break it down. Schwarzenegger's infrastructure commitments as governor were, for the most part, a thumbs up. He worked hard to put money into California's infrastructure, and during his time in office, one of the most important building projects was the extension and expansion of California's highway system, which included work to ease traffic in key areas. He had to make these changes because, well, let's face it, California is a busy place with terrible traffic. The good part is that some of these infrastructure projects did make life easier for Californians. Roads got better and there was a push for greener transportation options. Some say, however, that Schwarzenegger didn't do enough to fix California's huge infrastructure problem. In a word, his promises to improve it were a step in the right direction, but they weren't enough to solve the overall problems within the state. Schwarzenegger also focused on healthcare reforms during his governorship. He advocated for changes aimed at improving access to healthcare services, particularly for the uninsured and underserved populations. And whilst comprehensive healthcare reform proved challenging, he worked to find solutions to address some of the state's healthcare issues. Schwarzenegger advocated for redistricting reform to reduce gerrymandering and promote more competitive elections. Gerrymandering is where lawmakers change the boundaries of a voting district in favour of their own political party. Let's say 60 of 100 citizens in a state like the Yellow Party and 40 like the Purple Party. The state needs to create 5 new voting areas which in theory should hold 20 people. It's a game where you have to draw lines on a map to help your team win. He also proposed changes to the state's primary system, which ultimately led to the adoption of a top 2 primary system, where the top 2 candidates with the most votes, regardless of party, advanced to the general election. So whether you agree with what he did, it's fair to say he did make some positive changes. Bipartisan working, after-school learning for children, realigning the political map, and sweeping environmental changes are all positive. However, whether Schwarzenegger's time as governor made California better or worse in the long run is still a matter of debate. Supporters would say that he took on the big problems and made a lot of progress in areas like the environment by signing important laws to cut greenhouse gas emissions and fight climate change. Schwarzenegger's emphasis on improving California's infrastructure, like roads and public transportation, was seen as necessary for the state's growth and development, and his backing of after-school programs was a good way to keep kids off the streets and keep them doing useful things and improving their education. Critics will contend that his fiscal policies, budget cuts, and inability to achieve comprehensive healthcare reform had negative and ongoing consequences, and that these cuts hurt vulnerable communities and effectively kicked the can down the road. The state's pension issues also remained unresolved during his time, leading to concerns about long-term fiscal sustainability. And his efforts to reform the healthcare system faced obstacles which weren't fully realised, leaving many without adequate coverage. So, will he be back as President of the United States? Well, Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5 of the US Constitution states that a president must be a natural-born citizen of the United States. This typically means that the person must be born in the US or on US soil or to US parents, so it's probably unlikely. But could he use his unrivaled position to influence change in California, the United States, and the wider world? You bet. Let me know below what you make of Arnie's governorship, especially if you live in California. Is it better now than it was 20 years ago before he took office? Or even let me know if you think he would have made a good president, compared to some of the world's political leaders since. As always, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe so we know we're making content that you want to see, and we'll see you on the next episode. Toodaloo.